The receipt in my husband's coat pocket was dated 3 weeks before our anniversary. 2 first-class tickets to Barcelona. Departure, the Monday after my surgery. The woman's name on the second ticket was Melissa Chen. I had never heard it before. I held the paper between my thumb and index finger like it was something that might combust, though of course it didn't. Paper doesn't burn on its own. It just sits there, inert and damning, waiting for someone to decide what it means. My name is Sarah. I'm a bank branch manager in Asheville, North Carolina, and I have been trained to read documents with the same attention most people reserve for their children's faces. I read contracts. I read statements. I read the fine print that tells you what someone is really promising, versus what they say they're promising out loud. But I had not read the subtext of my own marriage correctly, and that was the part that sat in my chest like a stone. I did not scream. I did not even cry. I placed the receipt on the marble counter in our kitchen, smoothed it flat with the side of my hand, and took a photograph of it with my phone. Then I filed the original in a folder inside my desk drawer, nested beneath bank statements and tax documents where my husband would never think to look. My training had taught me something else, too: never react where someone can see you. Evidence first. Emotion second. Action third. The betrayal had a texture. Not the texture of the paper itself, but the texture of knowing that while I had been sitting in my oncologist's office 2 months earlier, discussing the timing of my surgery, my husband had been booking a romantic escape with another woman. That was the texture: synchronicity. Deliberate, methodical, almost insulting in its precision. If you want to know how the rest of this unfolds, you need to know who I really am. Not just a woman betrayed. Not just someone whose marriage was ending. Because that part, the affair, the tickets, the lies, that was the small story. The one everyone would understand. The real story had been running parallel to this one for the past 18 months, in a part of my life my husband had never asked about. I had started working at First Merchants Bank 7 years ago. It was steady work. Reliable. The kind of job that let me pay a mortgage and sleep well at night. My husband, David, worked in commercial real estate, development deals, project management, the kind of work that required him to be charming at dinners and convincing on phone calls. We had met at a networking event in Charlotte. He had approached me, complimented my dress, and I had believed him when he said he wanted to build something with someone stable. Stability was the trap, I see now. Stability is what makes you invisible. It's what makes someone think they can have a wife and a mistress, a marriage and an escape plan, because the wife is the kind of person who pays bills on time and doesn't ask questions. The wife is boring. The wife is safe. 3 years into our marriage, during a routine audit of account anomalies at the bank, I had flagged a pattern I wasn't supposed to find. A series of microtransfers from dormant accounts, amounts small enough not to trigger federal reporting, but consistent enough to suggest something deliberate. I had reported it through the proper channels. My regional supervisor had listened, nodded, and then the next day, a woman named Agent Patricia Voss from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network had called me directly. "How good are you at pattern recognition?" she had asked. "Very good," I had said. "How good are you at keeping secrets?" That was how it began. Patricia had explained that they had been investigating a money laundering operation moving through regional banks for 4 years. They had names, dates, transaction histories. What they didn't have was someone on the inside who understood the daily operations well enough to spot when the laundering slowed down, when new mules were brought in, when the operation shifted. They wanted me to remain in my job. Continue my normal work. But report to her directly, every 2 weeks, with documentation of anything unusual. I had said yes. I had said yes because I believe in something larger than myself. I had said yes because I understood that my job wasn't just about managing customer accounts, it was about protecting the integrity of a system that people depend on. And I had said yes, if I'm honest, because being asked to be more than I appeared to be was intoxicating. For 18 months, I had been 2 people. The wife who came home and made dinner and listened to David talk about his development deals. And the operative, the word Patricia used once, in a low voice during a coffee meeting at a Starbucks 3 towns over, who was methodically documenting the movement of illegal money through First Merchant's accounts. David did not know. He could not know. Patricia had been clear about that. The integrity of an investigation depends on compartmentalization. On the person with access maintaining their cover. And my cover was being exactly what I appeared to be, a reliable woman with a stable job who would never dream of deceiving anyone. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. While I had been lying to my husband in service of something real, he had been lying to me in service of something that evaporated the moment I touched it, a receipt, a name, a fantasy of escape with someone named Melissa Chen. I had moved through the days after I found the receipt with the precision I had learned from Patricia. I did not confront him. I did not cry in front of him. I did not let anything show. Instead, I opened my laptop late at night when he was asleep and I searched for Melissa Chen. There were 7 of them in the greater Charlotte area. One was a marketing consultant. One was a dental hygienist. One was a flight attendant. The last one was a loan officer at Piedmont Commercial Bank, and her name was linked to 3 accounts that had been flagged in our investigation as receiving deposits from the money laundering operation. I sat very still when I found that. I felt the way I imagine a chess player feels when they suddenly see the board not as a collection of pieces but as a single geometry. Every move illuminates the others. Every position reveals its purpose. David wasn't having an affair because he wanted to escape our marriage. He was having an affair with someone who was moving illegal money through North Carolina's banking system. He was either a knowing participant or a spectacular fool. I had not yet decided which was worse. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday. David had made a show of being supportive. He had driven me to the pre-op appointment, had held my hand in the waiting room, had kissed my forehead and said he would be there when I woke up. Then he had booked first-class tickets to Barcelona for the following Monday, when I would be 6 days post-operative, stitched up and sedated, dependent on someone to help me to the bathroom. I had 3 weeks to decide what to do with this information. 3 weeks to figure out whether I was going to blow apart my own marriage in service of an investigation, or whether I was going to find a way to make both truths visible at once. I called Patricia on a Tuesday morning, during my lunch break, from my car in the bank parking lot. "The situation is getting complicated," I said. "Explain," she said. I told her everything. The receipt. The name. The account connections. The surgery scheduled for a date that suddenly felt like a setup, like a test of my own attention. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Sarah, do you understand what you're asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to do your job," I said. "Just like I've been doing mine." The surgery happened on a Tuesday in March. Dr. Patel was thorough and kind. She had explained the procedure to me 3 times, in 3 different ways, until she was certain I understood. Ovarian cysts, benign, but they needed to come out. Laparoscopic surgery, relatively minor, outpatient, though they wanted me to stay for observation until evening. David arrived at 6 a.m. with coffee and a worried expression that I now understood was performance. He held my hand while they prepped me. He told me he loved me. He said he would be right there waiting when I woke up. He was. He was in the recovery room with flowers, white roses from the grocery store, the same flowers he bought me when he had missed my birthday last year to close a deal. He had his hand on my shoulder, and he was asking the nurses if I was okay, if I was in pain, and his concern sounded genuine because he was very good at sounding genuine. I came home to the house we had bought together, and I sat on the couch with my incisions wrapped tight and my pain medication making everything soft around the edges. David brought me water and painkillers. He set up the television. He said he had to run to the office for a meeting, but he would be back within an hour. He was gone for 4 hours. When he came back, his shirt was different. He had showered somewhere else. "Traffic was terrible," he said. "I'm sorry." I did not respond. I was learning that silence is its own kind of truth-telling. Silence doesn't lie. It just sits there, heavy, waiting for someone to fill it. On Thursday, Patricia came to the house. She had never been to the house before. She posed as a colleague from the bank, someone dropping off documents I needed to sign while I recovered. David was at work. She sat in my living room, on the edge of the sofa, and she laid out what they had found. David is not the primary target, she said. But he is knowingly facilitating the relationship between Melissa Chen and a man named Raymond Torres who runs the operation. David introduced them. He brought Melissa in. He was paid for it. There are deposits into an account in his mother's maiden name. $40,000 over 6 months. I was sitting very still, one hand on my abdomen where the stitches were still holding me together. Melissa is aware she's being investigated, Patricia continued. She doesn't know about you. But she does know that David is planning to leave the country. That Barcelona trip? It's not a vacation. Raymond has people there. Melissa was going to disappear. David was going to disappear with her. And me? I said. My voice sounded strange, distant. He would have called from Spain, Patricia said. Said he needed time to think. Or he would have just never come home. Either way, you would have been left here, recovering from surgery, without a husband and without answers. I looked at my hands. They looked normal. They looked like hands that belonged to someone who was stable, who was safe, who would never betray anyone. Those hands had been writing down the details of illegal transactions for 18 months. Those hands had been signing documents to a man who was planning to steal them away. What happens now? I asked. We move forward, Patricia said. You continue your recovery. You don't say anything to David. We have what we need. The arrests will happen next week. And my marriage? Patricia stood up. That was already over, Sarah. David just didn't know it yet. After she left, I sat in the quiet of my living room and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not sadness. Something cleaner than that. Something like clarity. I had spent 18 months telling myself that I was doing something noble, that I was serving a larger purpose, that my deception was justified by the outcome. But I had also been lying to myself about what my marriage was. Love survives disagreement. It survives conflict and hurt and disappointment. What it doesn't survive is deliberate deception, and I had been lying to David just as thoroughly as he had been lying to me. The only difference was that my deception had a badge behind it. The arrests happened on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after my surgery. Federal agents went to David's office at 7 a.m. and took him into custody for conspiracy to facilitate money laundering. They went to Melissa Chen's apartment and found her with a packed suitcase and a passport with a visa stamp already in it. They went to Raymond Torres's warehouse in Charlotte and found equipment, documents, and a list of 12 other banks where similar operations were running. It was, Patricia told me later, one of the largest busts in the region in 5 years. I knew none of this until the evening, when a detective came to my house and asked me questions about my husband's finances, his habits, his contacts. I answered honestly. I had nothing to hide, or rather, everything I was hiding was already known to the people who needed to know it. David called me from holding at 10 p.m. His voice was terrified. Sarah, I don't know what's happening. They're saying I'm involved in some kind of money laundering scheme. It's insane. It's a mistake. I need you to call a lawyer. I could have told him that it wasn't a mistake. I could have told him that I had known about Melissa, about the Barcelona tickets, about the money. I could have told him that I had been documenting his crimes while he was planning his escape. Instead, I said, I can't help you with this, David. What? Sarah, what are you talking about? You heard me, I said. I can't help you. I won't. I hung up. I did not call a lawyer. I did not visit him. I let the legal system do what it was designed to do. The divorce papers arrived 6 weeks later, drawn up by a public defender. David, facing federal charges and desperate to make a deal, was attempting to claim that he had been coerced by Raymond Torres and Melissa Chen. He was claiming he had no idea what he was really involved in. He was claiming he was a victim of manipulation. None of it was true. But the claim itself told me everything I needed to know. He was going to lie his way through this the same way he had lied his way through our marriage. He was going to minimize, deflect, and rewrite the story until he was the sympathetic character. I signed the divorce papers without negotiation. I asked for nothing except the house. We had paid the mortgage down significantly. I could afford to keep it on my salary. More importantly, I didn't want anything of his. I didn't want spousal support or a settlement. I wanted him gone. At the sentencing hearing, 6 months later, I sat in the courtroom gallery. The judge sentenced David to 18 months for conspiracy, with a reduced sentence in exchange for his cooperation with the broader investigation. He would serve the time, be released on probation, and spend the rest of his life having this mark on him. The judge made a comment about how it was tragic when people allowed themselves to be drawn into criminal enterprises. David sat at the defense table with his lawyer and he looked small. The suit he was wearing was not expensive. His hair needed cutting. He looked like someone who had been caught, not someone who had gotten away with anything. But what struck me most was that even then, even sitting in a federal courtroom facing prison time, he had not looked at me with understanding. He had not looked at me with shame. He had looked at me with confusion, as if wondering why I was there, what I was doing in his story. I realized then that he had never actually seen me. Not once in 10 years. I had been the backdrop to his life, the reliable wife, the one who could be deceived because she was too invested in the appearance of stability to notice the cracks. The case against the broader money laundering operation took another 9 months to prosecute. Patricia kept me updated, though I was technically no longer an active informant once the initial arrests were made. Melissa Chen took a plea deal and testified against Raymond Torres. Raymond Torres was convicted and sentenced to 8 years. 12 other individuals across 3 states were arrested. My name did not appear in any court documents. My role was listed as a cooperative witness, but my identity was sealed. The bank commended me for my diligence during the investigation. They gave me a promotion and a 15% raise. What they did not know was that I had done something that Patricia had explicitly warned me never to do. I had made copies of every document, every transaction, every piece of evidence I had reported to her. I had kept duplicates in a safe deposit box at a different bank. I had created insurance against the possibility that the investigation might go sideways, that the outcome might not be what it should be. I had lied to Patricia, just as I had lied to David. Just as I had lied to myself about what I was willing to do in service of the larger good. 2 years after the arrests, I was living a life that looked almost identical to the one I had left. I still worked at First Merchants Bank. I still managed the Asheville branch. I still lived in the house David and I had bought. But everything underneath had changed. I had changed. The therapist I saw, Patricia had recommended her, someone who specialized in people who had lived double lives, explained to me that this was normal. When you compartmentalize yourself, when you learn to lie to the people closest to you, even in service of something just, you lose something. You lose the ability to believe that the surface and the depth are the same thing. You start to assume that everyone is lying, because you have been lying. Is that true? I asked her. Am I assuming everyone is lying? Are they? She asked. I thought about David, who had lied from the beginning. I thought about Melissa Chen, who had lied about what she was. I thought about Patricia, who had asked me to lie and had never quite acknowledged that it might cost me something. I thought about the people I worked with, who had no idea that the woman processing their loan applications was also the woman who had brought down a federal crime ring. I don't know, I said. Then maybe that's the answer, the therapist said. You don't know. Most people don't. Most people are just trying to get through the day. They're not lying deliberately. They're just not seeing. I had plenty of time to think about that because I was dating again, and it was strange and disorienting in ways I hadn't anticipated. I went to dinner with a man named Robert who worked in software development. He was kind and thoughtful, and he asked me questions about myself. I told him the things you tell people on first dates, about my childhood, my family, my work at the bank. I did not tell him that I had once been an undercover operative. I did not tell him that I had documented my own husband's crimes. I did not tell him that I understood the architecture of deception well enough to know that he, too, might be lying to me in ways I might never detect. "You seem sad sometimes," he said to me, on our 5th date. "Like something in you is very far away." "I was married before," I said. "It ended badly." That was true. It was also, technically, a lie, because it left out the part about who I had been during that marriage, and how I had become someone else. He reached across the table and held my hand. It felt like a test. "I'm sorry," he said. "I hope I can help you feel happy again." I did not pull my hand away. I did not tell him that I might not be capable of the kind of happiness he was imagining. I sat there and I let him believe that I was a woman with a broken heart, rather than a woman who had broken herself in service of truth. The divorce was final on a Thursday in July. I signed the papers without ceremony. David had agreed not to fight me on anything: the house, my possessions, the division of our accounts. He wanted to move forward. He wanted to start over. His lawyer sent me a letter saying he bore me no ill will and hoped I would find peace. I did not respond to the letter. I filed it away with the receipt from Barcelona and the photographs of transaction records and the notes I had taken during my meetings with Patricia. At work, I was promoted again. The new branch manager position meant more responsibility, more staff, more visibility within the regional network. It also meant more access to information and, ironically, more access to opportunity for fraud. I understood, after everything, that opportunity doesn't create crime. Character does. And I had learned that my character was more complicated than I had believed. I was not a good person who had done a bad thing. I was not a bad person who had done a good thing. I was a person who had lied to everyone she loved, for justice, yes, but also for the intoxicating feeling of being important, of being someone who mattered, of being more than she appeared. Patricia called me on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 years after the original investigation began. "I'm leaving the bureau," she said. "Taking a position with a private firm. I wanted you to know that your cooperation made a real difference. The money laundering network you helped us dismantle had moved over $40 million through the banking system." $40 million. That matters. It matters, I repeated. The number was enormous. It was also oddly abstract. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "And I wanted to say that I know what I asked of you wasn't fair. The compartmentalization, the deception, I framed it as necessary, and it was. But it also cost you something. I see that now." I was quiet. This was the closest Patricia had come to an apology. "What I did to my marriage," I said finally. "That was on me. You didn't ask me to marry him. You didn't ask me to lie to him about who I was. I made those choices." "You did," Patricia said. "And you were right to make them. But I think what I'm saying is, you deserve to know that it meant something. That you meant something. That you weren't just a tool we used and then discarded." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about the nature of meaning. I had felt meaningful when I was documenting David's crimes. I had felt important. I had felt like I was part of something larger than myself. But had I been? Or had I just been replacing one kind of deception with another, trading the lie of a normal marriage for the lie of a noble cause? Robert asked me to marry him on a Saturday in October, 3.5 years after David's arrest. We were in the mountains, hiking, and he stopped on a ridge overlooking the valley and he got down on one knee and he said, "I know you have secrets. I know there are parts of you I don't understand. But I love the parts of you I do know, and I want to spend my life learning the rest." I could have said yes immediately. It was the romantic thing to do. It was what a woman who was trying to heal herself would do: accept the love that was being offered, move forward, build something new. Instead, I said, I need to tell you something first. We sat on a flat rock and I told him about David. Not all of it. I didn't tell him about Patricia or the investigation or my role in bringing down a federal crime ring. But I told him that my marriage had ended because of infidelity and deception, and that I had been complicit in that deception by not seeing what was in front of me. I told you that already, he said gently. I know, I said. But I don't think you understand what I mean. I wasn't just betrayed. I was also betraying. Not in the same way he was, but I was lying to him. I was living a double life. And I think I need you to understand that before you ask me to marry you. Robert took my hand. Sarah, everyone has parts of themselves they don't show. Everyone is living multiple lives in some way. That's not a secret. That's just being human. It's not the same, I said. What I did. You survived, he said. You got out of something that was poisoned from the beginning, and you survived it. I don't need to know all the details. I just need to know that you're willing to try again. I looked at his face. He was sincere. He was kind. He was offering me the option of not carrying this alone anymore. Okay, I said. Yes. Okay. We got married 8 months later, in a small ceremony in my backyard. Patricia came. She was no longer my handler, just a friend, though that word felt imprecise for what we were to each other. She had changed too, she seemed lighter without the weight of the investigation. She seemed more human. My mother came. David's mother did not come, and she did not send a gift. I had not expected her to. On my wedding day, I wore a white dress that my mother had found at a consignment shop, and I stood in my backyard, the house that David and I had bought, the house that was now just mine, and I made promises to Robert. But I made them knowing something that most brides don't know. I made them knowing that I was capable of compartmentalization, of deception, of living with the gap between who I appeared to be and who I actually was. I made them knowing that I had lied before and that I might lie again if I believed it was justified. What Robert didn't know was that I was also making them knowing that I had learned the cost of those lies. That I understood, in a way most people don't, that the gap between the surface and the depth never closes. It just gets wider the longer you maintain it. The wedding was lovely. It was genuine. I loved Robert when I said I did. I was not lying in that moment. But I was also aware of myself being aware of myself, of the part of me that was experiencing the joy of the wedding, and the part of me that was observing that joy and documenting it, the way I had once documented transactions and criminal conspiracies. That was the real inheritance David had given me. Not betrayal, though there was that. But the knowledge that you can live inside yourself in a way that no one else can access, that you can be completely present and completely hidden at the same time, and that once you know how to do that, you can never quite unknow it. We honeymooned in Portugal, not Spain, because I had no desire to follow the path David had planned. We went to Lisbon and we walked through the old city and I let myself feel happy in a way that was uncomplicated by the awareness of my own complexity. And it worked, mostly. I was happy. Robert was good to me. We built something together that was solid and real. But I kept the safe deposit box. I kept the copies of the documents. I kept them because I had learned that evidence is the only thing that lasts, the only thing that doesn't change with time or emotion or the need to believe in your own goodness. For years after my wedding, Patricia called me on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was strange, tight, controlled. I wanted you to hear this from me, she said. David was released from prison this morning. He's on probation, and he's relocating to Atlanta to be closer to his mother. I wanted you to know before you heard it from someone else. I was at work. I was sitting at my desk, looking out at the branch floor where my employees were processing customer transactions, and I was hearing that the man I had once been married to was now loose in the world. Thank you for telling me, I said. He asked about you, Patricia added. During his exit interview. He wanted to know if you were, well, if you were happy. I sat with that for a moment. David had spent 2 years in federal prison. He had been released early for good behavior. He had spent that entire time, presumably, thinking about his life and his choices. And one of the things he had thought about was me. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "Nothing," Patricia said. "It's not my place to talk about you. But I thought you should know that he wanted to know." After we hung up, I did something I hadn't done in 4 years. I opened the safe deposit box. I took out the stack of documents, the photographs of transactions, the notes from my meetings with Patricia, the evidence of my own deception, carefully documented. I sat on the floor of the bank's vault and I read through them. It was like reading a story about someone else, someone I had been briefly and then stopped being. The handwriting was mine, but the person who had written those notes felt like a stranger. What I had done, what David had done, what Patricia had asked me to do, none of it felt as important now as it had then. The money laundering ring had been dismantled. The criminals had been convicted. The system had worked, more or less. And I had been changed by my role in that system, but not in the way I had expected. I thought I would be changed into someone better. More noble. More pure. Instead, I had just been changed into someone who understood that purity is a luxury, that everyone lies, and that the lie you tell in service of justice is just as much a lie as the lie told in service of greed. I could have destroyed the documents. I could have shredded them or burned them or left them in the vault to be discovered by whoever came after me. But instead, I took them home. I organized them. I added a few notes about what had happened since David's conviction, the broader investigation, the outcome. I was creating a record. I was bearing witness. I was doing what I had always done, even in moments when bearing witness cost me something. I was documenting the truth. That night, Robert asked me why I was quiet. He had learned to recognize the signs, the way I turned inward, the way I looked like I was very far away. "Someone I used to know got out of prison today," I said. "David?" he asked. I nodded. I had told Robert about David, though not the full story. Robert knew enough to understand why the news would affect me. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. And I was. I was not devastated. I was not angry. I was something more complicated than that. I was grieving for the person I had been, the person who had believed that deception in service of justice was noble. I was also relieved that I was no longer that person. "Do you want to talk about it?" Robert asked. "No," I said. "But thank you for asking." We sat together in our living room and Robert held my hand. He didn't need me to explain anything. He just needed me to know that he was there. That was the difference between Robert and David. Robert could sit with the unknown parts of me without needing me to justify them or explain them away. I thought about what Patricia had said, that David had wanted to know if I was happy. I realized that I was happy, but not in the way he had probably imagined. I was happy because I had learned to live with the gap between who I was and who I appeared to be, and I had learned to make peace with that gap instead of trying to bridge it. The truth, I had learned, doesn't set you free. Truth just makes you aware of how complex freedom actually is. 2 years later, I received a letter at work. It was forwarded through the bank, so I didn't know who it was from until I opened it. The handwriting was familiar. David had written to me from Atlanta, where he was working as a project manager for a small real estate firm. He was on probation. He had been seeing a therapist. He had written a letter to his mother apologizing for his actions, though he didn't know if she would ever forgive him. And he had written to me to say that he was sorry. Not sorry in the way people are usually sorry, performatively, hoping for something in return. But genuinely sorry, in the way someone is sorry when they have finally understood the impact of their actions. "I know that nothing I can say will undo what I did," he wrote. "And I know that you have moved on, which is good. You deserved better than what I gave you. But I wanted you to know that in prison, I had a lot of time to think about my life. And what I kept coming back to was you. How patient you were with me, how kind, even when I didn't deserve it. And how I threw that away because I was chasing something that wasn't real. I don't expect you to write back. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I understand, finally, what I lost. And that I'm sorry for losing it. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it in the same folder as the documents from the investigation, the evidence of the crime we had both been part of, him knowingly, me in the service of justice. I did not write back. I did not call. I simply acknowledged, to myself, that this was the last piece of the story. David had taken responsibility for his actions. He had served his time. He had asked for forgiveness. The circle had closed. What I had not yet done was forgive myself. That evening, I called Patricia. We got coffee once a month now, just to stay in touch, to maintain the bond that had been forged in the crucible of that investigation. David wrote to me, I said. I know, Patricia said. He called me before he sent it. He wanted to know if he should. I told him it was his choice, but that I thought you probably deserved to decide whether you wanted to hear from him. And you didn't think you should tell me that he was planning to write? I thought about it, Patricia said. But I decided it was more important that you make your decision without knowing what was coming. The same way you decided to work with me without telling David. The same architecture of deception, but inverted. Does that bother you? I thought about it. No, I said finally. Because I understand now why you did it. You were protecting something. And you were letting me maintain my agency. Sarah, Patricia said, I want to apologize. Not for the investigation that needed to happen. But for what I asked of you. For asking you to live a double life and framing it as necessary when the truth is more complicated than that. You don't need to apologize, I said. I made my own choices. I could have refused. I could have reported David through normal channels. I could have told him everything. I chose not to, and I need to live with that choice. Have you? Lived with it? I'm learning to, I said. After we hung up, I went home and I found Robert in the kitchen making dinner. He was cooking pasta, which was what he always made when he wanted to do something simple and good. He looked up when I came in and he smiled, and I realized that this was what I had been searching for all along, not someone who didn't know my secrets, but someone who could love me despite them, without needing me to justify them. Good day? He asked. Complicated, I said. Want to talk about it? Not tonight, I said. But thank you for asking. We ate dinner together and we talked about small things, his work, my work, a show we were watching, a vacation we were planning. And I was present for all of it, even as the small part of me that had been trained to document and observe took notes on how happy I was, how safe I felt, how close we had become. It was a version of honesty, I thought. Not complete transparency, but complete presence. Complete investment in the moment, even with the awareness that nothing lasts, that everything can change, that sometimes the people we love surprise us with their darkness. 10 years after David's arrest, I was invited to a conference on financial crimes and forensic accounting. I was one of the keynote speakers, though my presentation was carefully vague about my own role in any investigations. I could speak theoretically about patterns, about how to spot anomalies, about the way small transactions can hide large truths. What I could not do was tell the real story. The real story belonged to Patricia and me and David and the people who had been convicted. It belonged to the past, and the past had already been processed through courts and prisons and sentencing guidelines. But I could speak about what I had learned. I could tell other people in law enforcement and financial regulation that the cost of deception is not always obvious in the moment. That asking someone to live a double life, even in service of justice, changes them in ways that are irreversible. That the architecture of a lie, once built, becomes the architecture of how you relate to the world. We talk about heroes, I said to the audience, which was full of federal agents and bank compliance officers and forensic accountants. We talk about people who step up and do the right thing, even when it costs them something. But what we don't often talk about is what comes after. What happens when the crime is solved and the case is closed and the person who was asked to compromise themselves has to figure out who they are now? I didn't name names. I didn't tell the story of my marriage or my role in the investigation. I just spoke from the perspective of someone who had been changed by the experience of living between two truths. Afterward, a woman approached me. She was young, maybe 30, and she introduced herself as a compliance officer who had been asked to cooperate with a federal investigation into her own company. "They want me to document my boss's activities," she said. "And they're saying it's important, that it will help stop something serious. But they also said I can't tell anyone, not even my husband. And I keep thinking about what you said, about what comes after. I keep thinking about whether I'm willing to pay that price." I looked at her and I saw myself, 10 years younger, standing at the crossroads where I had stood. "That's the question you need to answer for yourself," I said. "Not for the government or for justice or for some larger good. For yourself. Can you live with the deception? Can you live with the gap between who you are and who you appear to be? And if the answer is yes, can you live with the cost of that yes? What if I say no?" she asked. "Then you say no," I said. "You report the crimes through normal channels. You refuse to compartmentalize yourself. You accept that you might not be the one who brings this to justice, but that you will still be yourself." She nodded and she thanked me and she walked away. I never found out what she decided. I didn't ask Patricia, though I could have. Because what mattered was that she had asked herself the question. That she had acknowledged that there was a choice to be made. That was something David never had the luxury of asking. He had simply acted, and the consequences had followed. He had not been given the option of refusing, of turning back, of choosing a different path. He had just stumbled into something and been caught. But this woman, and everyone like her, had the option of asking. And I hoped that she would ask it carefully, and that she would answer it honestly. 6 months later, I received a letter at the bank. It was from a woman named Jennifer Chen, not Melissa, but the name was close enough that I had to reread it. Jennifer was writing to tell me that she had listened to the recording of my keynote address. She had been Melissa Chen's sister, she said. She had been one of the people who had suffered when Melissa was arrested and convicted. And she wanted to tell me that she forgave me, even though I had never asked for forgiveness. "My sister made her own choices," Jennifer wrote. "Just like your ex-husband made his. Their fall was not your fault, even though you were part of the machinery that brought them down. I wanted you to know that I don't blame you for doing what you did. And I hope that you don't blame yourself." I read the letter in my office, and I felt something shift inside me. Not healing, I had already healed, or at least learned to live with the wound. But closure. The sense that the story had a shape now, that it had affected people beyond just me, and that some of those people had the generosity to offer forgiveness. I wrote back to Jennifer and I told her that I was grateful for her letter. I told her that I was sorry for what had happened to her sister, and that I hoped Melissa had found some way to rebuild her life. I did not ask for absolution, because I had learned that absolution is not the same as forgiveness, and that some things cannot be absolved. After I mailed the letter, I sat at my desk and I thought about the nature of justice. I thought about what I had done in the service of it, and what it had cost me, and whether that cost had been worth the outcome. And I realized that I still didn't have a clear answer. Justice had been served, technically. The crimes had been prosecuted. The perpetrators had been punished. The money had been recovered or documented. The system had worked. But at what cost? My marriage had ended. Patricia had left federal service. I had spent years learning to trust my own judgment again. And Jennifer Chen had lost her sister to prison, even though her sister had been part of the crime. Was that justice? Or was it just consequences, the inevitable fallout when hidden things are exposed? I think it was both. Justice and consequences are not the same thing, but they are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. Robert and I bought a house on the water. It was a small place, nothing fancy, but it had a deck that looked out over a lake. We moved there when I stepped down from my position at the bank. I was 62 years old, and I had worked in the financial sector for 37 years. It was time to do something else. I didn't retire entirely. I consulted on compliance issues, helped smaller banks set up their audit procedures, wrote about forensic accounting for professional journals. But I did it on my own terms, from the house on the water, without the weight of managing a branch or the pressure of meeting quarterly targets. Robert was happy. He had taken early retirement from his software company. He cooked. He read. He spent time on the water in his kayak. He was the kind of happy that comes from having built something real and being able to step away from it without guilt. I was happy too, but my happiness had a different texture. It was built on the foundation of having survived something, having been tested and come out the other side. It was the happiness of someone who understands that peace is not the absence of conflict but the ability to live with conflict without being destroyed by it. David called me once, 3 years into our retirement. I didn't recognize his voice at first. "Sarah," he said. "I'm getting married. I wanted you to hear that from me, not from someone else. I know we haven't spoken in a long time, but I felt like you deserved to know." I was sitting on the deck, looking out at the water. Robert was inside, making lunch. "Congratulations," I said, and I meant it. "Her name is Catherine," he said. "She's a teacher. She knows about my past. She knows what I did. And she loves me anyway." "That's good," I said. "Sarah, I want to ask you something. Are you happy? With Robert, I mean. Are you happy?" I thought about the question. "Yes," I said. "I am." "Good," David said. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy. I know I couldn't give you that." "No," I said. "You couldn't." After we hung up, I told Robert that David had called. "What did he want?" Robert asked. "To tell me he's getting married. And to ask if I was happy." "Are you happy?" Robert asked. "Yes," I said. "But not because David is gone. Happy for a different reason. Happy because I understand myself now. Happy because I made a choice and I lived with the consequences." Robert kissed my forehead. "That's good," he said. "Because you deserve that happiness. You earned it." I had earned it, I supposed. Though earning implies a fairness to the universe that I'm not sure exists. What I had done was survive, and learn, and eventually forgive myself for the choices I had made. That was enough. Patricia visited us once, a year after David's call. She was older now, her hair more gray than I remembered. She was working for a private consulting firm, helping corporations set up their own compliance procedures. She seemed lighter than she had in the years of the investigation, as if she had finally put down a burden she had been carrying. We sat on the deck and we watched the water change colors in the late afternoon light. "I've been thinking about that investigation," Patricia said. "About what I asked you to do. And I want you to know that I've changed my mind about some of it. Not about the investigation itself, that needed to happen. But about the way I handled it. I think I asked too much of you." "You did," I said. "But I said yes. I could have said no. But the way I framed it, the pressure I put on you, I think I made it very hard to say no." "Yes," I said. "You did. But that's the job, isn't it? That's what you're trained to do. You find the leverage and you use it. And you hope it works out. And if it doesn't, you live with that." Patricia looked at me. "Have you lived with it?" "I'm trying," I said. "Every day, I'm trying." We sat in silence for a while. The water was very still. There were no boats, no people. Just the two of us and the sound of the wind in the trees. "If you could do it over," Patricia said, "would you make the same choice?" I thought about that. I thought about David in prison, and Melissa Chen convicted, and Raymond Torres serving 8 years, and Jennifer Chen losing her sister to the justice system. I thought about my marriage ending, and Robert finding me, and the version of myself that I had become. I don't know, I said finally. I would like to believe that I would say no. That I would refuse to compartmentalize myself. But I'm not sure I'm that noble. I'm not sure any of us are. No, Patricia said. We're not. After Patricia left, I understood something that I had been circling for years. The question wasn't whether I had done the right thing. The right thing and the wrong thing are not always in opposition. They can be the same action, viewed from different angles. The question was whether I could live with the complexity of that fact. And I could. I had learned to live with it the way you learn to live with any chronic condition, by accepting it, by adjusting, by finding ways to move forward without pretending it doesn't exist. Money magnifies character. It does not create it. I had learned that from watching David. He was not a different person once he became involved in money laundering. He was the same person, ambitious, charming, capable of profound deception, except with a larger stage and higher stakes. I was not a different person once I became an operative for the federal government. I was the same person, careful, precise, capable of compartmentalization, except with permission and purpose. The choices we make don't create who we are. They reveal who we already are. 20 years after David's arrest, I was 72 years old and I had been married to Robert for almost as long as I had been married to David. We had built a quiet life on the water. We had adopted a dog from a local shelter. We had a garden where we grew vegetables. We had the kind of life that most people would call happy and unremarkable. But I was no longer unremarkable. My work on forensic accounting had gained recognition in the field. My papers had been cited in legal cases. I had been asked to serve as an expert witness in several prosecutions. Gradually, without seeking it, I had become someone known in my field, not for the investigation that had changed my life, but for the work that had come after, the careful documentation of fraud and the analysis of hidden crimes. Robert and I were sitting on the deck one evening, watching the sunset, when he said to me, "I've been thinking. I know you can't tell me the details, but I want you to know that I've figured it out. Or most of it. You were involved in something important. Something that changed you. Something that you had to keep secret for a long time." I turned to look at him. "How did you figure it out?" "Patricia," he said. "The way you talk about her. The way she looks at you. The way you both seem to be carrying the same secret. And David, the things you've never said about David. And the fact that you spent years after the investigation learning not to lie, even though you never explicitly said you had been lying. It doesn't bother you?" I asked. "It does," he said. "It bothers me that you had to carry that alone for so long. It bothers me that no one asked you if you were okay with what was being asked of you. But it doesn't bother me that you made that choice. People do things for reasons. People sacrifice for things they believe in. That's what being human is." I took his hand. "I never told you because I was trying to protect you. From the knowledge, from the complicity, from having to carry it too." "I know," he said. "But you should know that I would have wanted to know. That I would have wanted to carry it with you." That was the moment, I think, when I finally understood what forgiveness meant. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't pretending that nothing had happened. It was the recognition that someone loved you despite your flaws, your deceptions, your capacity for harm. It was the willingness to know the worst of you and stay anyway. Robert died 5 years later, suddenly, of a heart attack. He was sitting on the deck reading a book, and then he wasn't. The dog was the one who alerted me, pacing and whining until I came outside. I buried him in the small cemetery near our house. Patricia came to the funeral. So did my mother, who was in her 90s and moving slowly but still present. Some of my colleagues from the bank came. Robert's family came. It was a small funeral for a small life, but it was filled with people who had loved him and known him. I did not cry at the funeral. I had learned years ago that grief is not the same as emotion, that crying is just one way the body expresses pain. I stood by the grave and I felt the weight of his absence like a physical thing, but I did not cry. At the reception, afterward, Patricia pulled me aside. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "But I will figure it out." That's what I do. I figure things out. Patricia reached into her purse and she pulled out a folder. She handed it to me. "What is this?" I asked. "The original investigation file," she said. "Everything we documented about David, about the money laundering operation, about your role. I've been keeping it all these years. But I think it's time you had it. I think it's time you knew that what you did was recorded, that it was acknowledged, that it was real." I opened the folder. Inside were the documents I had once photographed myself, along with a detailed summary of my work. My name was listed clearly, Sarah Morrison, cooperating witness. There were dates, transaction amounts, the description of each report I had filed. It was all there, official and sealed and preserved. "Why are you giving this to me now?" I asked. "Because you're ready for it," Patricia said. "Because you spent 20 years trying to bury it or integrate it or understand it, and now I think you're finally at a place where you can simply acknowledge it and move on." I took the folder home. I added it to the collection of documents I had been keeping in my safe. I did not read through it that night. Instead, I sat on the deck where Robert and I had spent so many evenings, and I thought about the architecture of my own life. I had been built by choices, the choice to say yes to Patricia, the choice to marry David despite the gap between us, the choice to accept Robert's love, the choice to forgive myself. Each choice had led to another, creating a shape that made sense only in retrospect. The sun set over the water, and I was alone in a way I had never been before. Not lonely, I had never felt lonely, even in my unhappiness. But alone in the sense that I was finally, completely responsible for my own story. I could rewrite it if I wanted to. I could pretend that I had never been an operative, that my marriage had ended for some other reason, that I had become a successful forensic accountant through conventional means. But I chose not to rewrite it. Instead, I chose to own it.